Welcome to my much-delayed final video on my 2021 overall 1v1 deck championship. And I'm actually going to start this video by talking a little bit about the tournament I'm running in 2022, since I ended up delaying this video so long. In the course of the 2021 tournament, I generated the start of a tier list of factions. Now, I've had a rating list for a long time, and I sort of look at rating lists and tier lists as being two slightly different things. My rating list indicates how well decks do when they're paired with partners that are a wide variety of partners, pretty close to their performance in random deck selection. So it just tells you how good a faction is this if you aren't putting it in the perfect situation. A tier list is a little different. This indicates how viable are decks if you're trying to put them with the best possible partners, but also the opposing deck is paired with the best possible partners. And that's really how commonly are you going to see this faction present in the decks that are at least this good, where this is usually a pretty high level of good. In this episode, the matches I'm talking about actually end up generating the S-, S, and S+ parts of this tier list, which are decks that made the cut at the end of round 4 for S-, actually factions that had at least 2 decks including them make that cut, because a single deck might have been a fluke, but 2 decks probably isn't. S goes for decks that make it past the round 5 cut, which required 7 wins and 3 losses in this tournament. And S+ went to any faction that put 2 decks, including that faction, into the top 5. I originally meant for this to be a 4th cut, but it turned out that the 2nd and 3rd cuts were harsh enough in the requirements I made that I wasn't playing any more matches at this one. It was actually decks that finished in the top 5 after the tournament was over. So with me having made the start of that tier list, what I'm doing in 2022 is I'm setting up another big championship tournament, but for this tournament, every faction that finished with an S-, S, or S+ rating is banned from this tournament. So this is an A-class tournament I'm doing in 2022, and I've just sort of started the qualification. I've started the first qualifier for decks that are getting into this. I have 16 seeded decks and then 8 qualifiers that will each give 2 decks qualified spots into it, and then possibly some wild cards from the qualifiers if I have decks that tied for second, very close to getting in and should have gotten in. So that will be interesting, and you'll be seeing me make some content about that over the course of this year, but probably just like the Marvel tournament took months to finish, most likely the qualifications for this will finish months later, because there's such a wide variety of different factions that could be viable at A-class level that it takes me a while to narrow stuff down. But back to S-class in 2021. I had to think quite a while about how to structure this last video, and I eventually decided I was going to follow individual decks or groups of decks through the Swiss and top 8 instead of just summarizing this happened in round 4, this happened in round 5. I'm going to start with the leader at the end of the group stage, the Ghost Zombies. And you can see their record up there for what happened in rounds 4 and 5. To some degree, this might look like a tremendous collapse, given that they started 6-0. However, what happened there was they faced really, really strong opponents. Both of these decks that they lost to made Final 8, plus 3 out of these 4 games were close. And as a matter of fact, in the end, despite a 0-4 slide at the end, Ghost Zombies still finished this tournament in 10th place. As a matter of fact, my round 4 match summary for Ghost Zombies versus Robot Geeks, which Robot Geeks came in as the number 1 overall seed, and on top of that, I also have it ranked as the number 1 deck in 3-player, meaning it's just probably the most broken possible deck you can make in Smash Up. That match summary, Ghost Zombies facing the strongest deck in Smash Up, was still a huge wall of text on my Reddit post because both games were giant struggles. So Ghost Zombies did not stay as the leader, but they still finished, 3/4 of the way up the field, which is quite impressive. Now, next I'm going to go to a set of decks instead of a single deck, and that is all of the Geeks decks that didn't quite make it. Innsmouth and Elder Geeks started with 3 records of 3 wins and 3 losses in the group stage, so they were facing elimination unless they just won 4 games in a row in the Swiss rounds. Geek, Time Travelers, and Alien Geeks also, while they started with 4 wins, 4 or 5 wins, also failed to make top 8. You can see their Swiss round results on the screen, and notice Alien Geeks dropped just as hard as Ghost Zombies did, but since they started with 1 fewer win, they finished worse. 3 of these 4 are defensive Geeks decks, and the aggressive option among this set of 4 relies on a higher RNG partner for its offense than the other aggressive Geeks decks. If you don't draw new acolytes at the last time, Innsmouth will brick quite hard. In 1v1, it typically does need a reshuffle in order to get the job done. So, as a set, all of these decks can be punched in the mouth. 3 of them right away, Innsmouth Geeks, while it has to hit with a reshuffle. But that wasn't necessarily that. You won't necessarily notice that they can be punched in the mouth with competition at a lower level, because it really takes a Bleeding Age top-grade opponent to deliver that punch. Geek Time Travelers finished the highest out of this set of 4 decks, but it still missed living up to its original seed by 1 place. Alien Geeks took the worst hit of all of these decks, because they started out as the number 2 seed, and almost the only deck that was in range to catch Robot Geeks on my rating list, unless Robot Geeks had a tremendous collapse, but then Alien Geeks finished in 18th place after getting countered in a Geeks Mirror by Cthulhu Geeks, because Cthulhu versus Alien, Cthulhu typically has the better VP strategy head-to-head, so unless the Alien's partner has extra actions or other mechanics to counter madness, Cthulhu will typically beat Aliens head-to-head, and then Alien Geeks ran into Ghost Robots in its final match to get knocked out of the tournament at 5-5. Speaking of Ghost Robots, the Rush decks as a whole posted a lot of 10th to 20th place results, which in a tournament this strong are very strong results. There's a huge wave of aggressive decks sitting at 6 wins and 4 losses, but only Ghost Robots managed to crack the top 8 and be the critical deck that made sure that Ghosts earn a S rather than an S- rating in my tier list, and I have viewed Ghost Robots as at least the probable top aggro deck in 1v1 in the game since the release of Cream Puff Man. It got 2 wins in the Swiss, as opposed to most of its peers' 2 draws. That got it through to the top 8, and in the top 8, it drew against a pair of aggro Geeks decks. Not the defensive Geeks decks that can get punched in the mouth, but the aggro Geeks decks that will race with the fast decks they face. And this allowed Ghost Robots to finish the tournament in 5th place and jump to 3rd overall in my deck ratings, because even though it was a 5th place tournament finish, it turned out to be a big rating gain, because Alien Geeks counted as a tougher opponent relative to my rating list than it did to the tournament standings, because realistically 5-5 doesn't quite accurately reflect how strong Alien Geeks is. But in any case, yes, Ghost Robots jumped to 3rd in my deck ratings, and they now hold a comfortable lead on anything else that does not involve Geeks. They may stay as the top non-Geeks deck for a very long time in my rating list. Ghosts being a part of Ghost Robots helps their Geeks matchup a lot, and this is one critical reason why Ghost Robots can earn such a higher rating than the other Rush decks. Geeks in general want to play around their opponent's hands using their permission cards, and then also using banned lists to cover possibilities that could be in their opponent's hand, so that they don't have to waste a permission card. If there's one specific opposing card that they're scared of, they can wipe that card out with banned list, wait to save their permission for some other unknown threat later, and when you try to do this against Ghosts, you have to start thinking, how do Ghosts play? Well, they dump their hand regularly, and this makes it very hard to put a medium to high probability on any specific card being in the Ghost's hand at any particular point in time. Also, Cream Puff Man allows Ghosts to repeat the same action twice, which is very important if the Ghosts need to play one specific action really badly and their Geeks opponent is holding either Will Whedon or Force of Will, the ghost will play the action the first time, draw out the counterspell, and then they say, okay, let's use Cream Puff Man, play the action the second time. Do you have your second counterspell, or am I going to get to play it now? And the answer is usually yes, the ghosts are going to get to play it now. And that's a big part of why ghost robots can be so successful at rushing down Geeks decks. Now, there's a couple other decks that made top 8 as the absolute opposite stylistically of the ghost robots. Those two are a pair of Cthulhu decks, the Cthulhu Aliens and the Cthulhu Dragons. Both of these fall into the family of defensive Cthulhu decks. One of them is also a defensive Aliens deck, of course. Cthulhu Dragons made it to the top 8 by going 3-1 against aggressive decks, which is exactly the kind of decks that you would pick something like Cthulhu Dragons to try to counter. They made a draw against Exploring Avengers, who are very, very scary, and the number 1 seed going into my 2022 Class A tournament, because neither Explorers or Avengers made it through round 4 with the second deck, and Cthulhu Dragons also beat the Hydra Wizards 2-0, who are another very top-tier rush deck, but in this case, since the Hydra Wizards are pure rush without removal, once Imperial Dragons start landing everywhere, it is not fun for them. Hydra Wizards, in order to beat a Dragons deck, have to massively outclass them. And of course, Hydra Wizards are so fast that they massively outclass 90% of possible Dragons decks. The only problem is Cthulhu Dragons is the top Dragons deck on my list at this point for a reason. And it was able to stylistically counter the Hydra Wizards and be a comparably good deck, which means that they won that particular matchup 2-0. Cthulhu Aliens made the top 8 by going 4-0 against aggressive decks. So against full-on aggression without a Geeks hybridization, these two defensive Cthulhu decks did very, very well. Cthulhu Aliens eliminated the robot plants and then the ghost zombies from the tournament. I've already talked about both the ghost zombies' opponents. There's a reason why, despite going on a 0-4 slide, they still finished in 10th place. And then in the top 8, the Cthulhu Aliens completely collapsed. They went 0-4, while the Cthulhu Dragons went 2-2. I'm going to point to the defensive deck Peter principle here. Yes, they're both defensive decks, but Cthulhu Aliens has absolutely no choice but to fully commit to doing nothing but tanking up and playing alternate victory points. Dragons, however, have a little bit of an ability to occasionally make an aggressive play, and so they're maybe less good against things that aren't quite as strong as they are when compared to aliens, but they can actually be a little bit better when they're outclassed than aliens can be. Of course, it just typically takes a lot of opposing deck quality to outclass an aliens deck. But on top of that, there's also the problem that aliens do not like their Geeks matchup. It's not like Dragons love the Geeks matchup, but Dragons mind the aliens matchup more than they mind the Geeks matchup. The last thing I would say about them when comparing why Dragons picked up 2 more wins than aliens in the top 8, Cthulhu sort of covers the things that Dragons lose to, things like aliens. But aliens kind of cover the things that Cthulhu beats already. So aliens and Cthulhu are often beating some of the same things, which makes Cthulhu Aliens very consistent at beating things where its style works, but once it got to the top 8 and its style no longer worked, it was just completely screwed. Cthulhu Dragons can be soft-countered, but Cthulhu Aliens can be hard-countered. It's just that there are very, very few decks in the game capable of being so strong that they hard-counter Cthulhu Aliens. In another brief note about Cthulhu decks that are focusing on the Cthulhu Madness Spam aspect, Cthulhu's other over-focused partner, Elder Things, went down fairly comfortably to Ghost Robots in the 4th round and finished at 4-4. Cthulhu Anansi, even though you could sort of call that maybe even a rush deck, they, I believe, finished at 3-5, and I'll correct that in the text if I was wrong about that. As for the rest of the aliens, the 2 top finishing aliens decks both belong to the Aggro Aliens deck family. Alien Halflings barely missed the final 8 after a rough loss to the Aggro Geeks deck, Geek Rockstars, and of course part of that is the Geeks over Aliens counter comp, and they made a draw with Exploring Avengers, but they actually managed to finish the tournament in 8th place because Cthulhu Aliens collapsed so hard in the top 8 that they managed to finish the top 8 in 9th place. Innsmouth Aliens actually cracked a top spot by finishing 4th, even ahead of Robot Geeks in their 5th place finish. They made it to that 5-1 chase pack in the group stage, got knocked down by an Aggro Geeks deck just like Alien Halflings to drop to 5-3, but instead of making a draw with Exploring Avengers, they got to play and beat Robot Plants in the 5th round, and this allowed them to make the cut to top 8 at 7-3. Robot Plants is a dangerous deck, but I don't put it on par with Exploring Avengers at top level. Both decks are capable of dropping tremendous bursts of power on you, but Robot Plants have to do it on their turn, which makes them just a little easier to handle, whereas Exploring Avengers can do some nasty reactions after their opponent breaks a base and they get to see what the next base is. They can start reacting to that during their opponent's turn, and they're a little bit better at reacting to a base drop by just destroying something. Then, in the top 8, Innsmouth Aliens actually succeeded, unlike Cthulhu Aliens. Innsmouth Aliens made a draw against Cthulhu Dragons and a win against Cthulhu Geeks, which I would call a bit of an upset. More than a bit of an upset. Aliens into Cthulhu is Aliens facing a soft counter. Aliens into Geeks is Aliens facing a moderate counter. Those are both bad, and Aliens deck should really have a terrible time when facing Cthulhu Geeks. But out of all of the Aliens partners in this tournament, while Innsmouth may be somewhat unreliable in their draw quality due to that need to get a reshuffle, they also have the greatest capacity to punish a weak draw from an opposing deck. Cthulhu Geeks played 2 games against the Innsmouth Aliens and drew 0 banned lists. That is incredibly lucky for an Innsmouth deck. It also indicates that Innsmouth deck was able to be fast enough to minimize the number of turns that the Geeks deck had to draw banned lists in the middle of the game, because Innsmouth Aliens just ended those games too fast. Were I to repeat this match, I don't see Innsmouth Aliens stretching it to a 4-0 lead, because banned list will be a very, very nasty backhand against Innsmouth's offense. However, it was possible for it to get lucky in 2 games in a row, and that allowed them to make it to 8-4 at the end. 10-4! I can't math. Alright, so Ghost Robots finished 5th as the best rush deck. Innsmouth Aliens finished 4th as the most aggressive Aliens deck. Anyone want to take a guess which kind of Geeks decks took the podium spots? I mean, realistically, if you looked at the Geeks decks that didn't make it, you probably already recognized that it had to be the Aggro Geek family that finished in the top 3 spots. Cthulhu Geeks looked like they could have broken this pattern, but Innsmouth Aliens rushed them down, which I really don't think Innsmouth Aliens had as high a chance of doing against the 3 top finishing Geeks decks if Innsmouth Aliens had played them at the top 8. The king of 1v1 used to be just Geeks in 2016. But in 2021, the king of 1v1 had become specifically Aggro Geeks, and on top of that, the nobility holds much more power in the 2020s than it did in the 2010s. With a combined record of 11 match wins, 10 match draws, and 0 match losses, the 2 Geeks decks with the most consistent aggro partners take the top 2 spots, and one of the slightly more casino gaming style Aggro Geeks decks takes the 3rd spot. Aggro Geeks in total wins 38 and loses 14 games and finishes 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 19th out of 40. And that's it for the 2021 overall deck championship. You can see the results that this produced for the start of my tier list, probably posted over my face right about now. And in 2022, you're going to start seeing me give a little more information about what's going on in my attempts to figure out A tier. I'm looking forward to seeing some of those results. The cool thing about A tier is that with the absolutely most crazy broken stuff, all gone. It's now, there's a wide variety of decks that, if they have enough synergy, could turn out to start dominating the A-tier tournament. After all, Exploring Avengers as a top seed, those two factions individually are very strong, but I'm not sure they're the two best factions in the A-class field. On top of that, when I look at the top 4 seeds, I'm not looking at, Explorers appearing twice, Avengers appearing twice, Zombies appearing twice. There's going to be a lot of variety in this upcoming tournament, and I'm looking forward to telling you some of what happens in it. So I'll see you guys probably with the results from the first qualifier of 2022. Happy smashing, everyone!